Hi, everybody, and welcome to Mrs. G's Storytime. We are reading Star of Light by Patricia St. John with permission of Moody Publishing Company, and we are on Chapter 18, New Beginnings. While Mr. Swift, Rosemary, and Haman rescued Kenza, Jenny spent a long day at the hotel. It was a day in which she had plenty of time to think. She wished she knew more about the Lord Jesus and had a Bible so she could read about him. She thought about the picture at the clinic, and it reassured her that he loved children and wanted to come into her heart and change her. Instead of being cross and spoiled and vain, she could be strong and happy and loving, like putting a candle inside an empty lantern. So that light shines out, Aunt Rosemary had said. Lord Jesus, please come into my life, Jenny prayed. That night she had so much to think about that she was sure she would never go to sleep, and yet her eyes closed almost immediately, and the next thing she knew her mother was shaking her gently. Auntie Rosemary was sitting at the foot of the bed, laughing and holding in her arms a bundle wrapped up in a car rug. It's Kenza, cried Jenny, flinging herself into the bundle and hugging and kissing her. It was 2:00 in the morning, so they had to talk in whispers because the other guest. But Jenny wanted to know all about the rescue. Everybody was hungry, so they made some tea. Mrs. Swift spread some butter and honey on some bread and passed around biscuits. Never had there been a happier midnight feast, and Jenny knew she would remember this hour all her life. Kenza had been brought back, and all of Jenny's naughtiness had been forgiven and forgotten. She was going to start again, a new child in a new happy life, sitting there in bed with all the people she loved best grouped around her, and her mouth full of bread and honey, and she felt so happy that she thought she would burst. Her mother said rather weakly 4 times that they really must all go to bed, but no one took the slightest notice. They just went on eating and whispering. When Mr. Swift told them how they had escaped from Sir Muhammad, they fell back in his excitement. Everyone tried so hard not to laugh out loud, and then Kenza woke and sat up, blinking at them solemnly like a baby owl. She didn't seem to like all this midnight merriment, and after a few minutes she cuddled up in the rug and went to sleep again. Then Mrs. Swift said for the 5th time that they really must go to bed, and Mr. Swift said, all right, but let me just have one more piece of bread because falling off the bed made me hungry again. And then Rosemary wanted another piece, and so did Jenny, and her mother thought she might as well have one too. Then Mrs. Swift said for the 6th time that they really must go to bed, and this time they did listen to her. They all kissed Jenny good night and tucked her in bed, and then went off down the passage laughing at Mr. Swift, who was trying to walk quietly in his enormous squeaky shoes, like an elephant tried to walk on tiptoe. Jenny was left alone with her happiness. God had heard her prayers, and Kenza had come back. Everyone slept that next morning till the sun was high, except Haman and Rosemary. They got up at the usual time, and Haman, because he had slept well all night in the back seat of Mr. Swift's car. Rosemary, because she had a busy day ahead of her, and it was still quite early when she was disturbed by a loud knocking, and she got up with a little sigh. When she opened the door, she found Haman, his hands and face pink and shining from washing in the fountain. His rags were dreadfully torn and dirty, and he had nasty sores on his legs, but the child was as eager and full of life as spring morning. He kissed the nurse's hand and chuckled, and hopped uninvited over the threshold. He seemed to have come for a particular reason, but didn't know what to say. How's Kenza? He inquired. She's all right, said the nurse. Do you want to see her? For an answer, he skipped upstairs ahead of her to where Kenza lay in her old corner of the mat, her dark head pillowed on her arm, fast asleep. Haman nodded, well pleased, and then looked around hopefully to see if there was any chance of something to eat. He had timed his visit perfectly, for the English nurse was just in the middle of her breakfast. Haman sat cross-legged on the floor with a bright, hopeful eyes. He had not eaten honey sandwiches in the night, and was very hungry. The nurse gave him a bowl of sweet coffee and a huge hunk of bread. He sipped it noisily and chuckled with pleasure between mouthfuls. When he finished and cleaned out the bowl with his finger for fear of wasting any sugar, he came a little closer and said confidently, "Teach me to read." The nurse looked at him doubtfully. "Many people want to learn to read, and they only keep it up for 2 weeks. Then my time is all wasted." Haman shook his head firmly. "I want to go on every day until harvest time," he said, "because then I'm going home. My stepfather would be glad to see me at harvest because he's so busy. Could I learn to read before harvest? I would think so, replied the nurse, if you really come every day. She thought of her busy days and wondered where she would fit him in, but the child seemed so keen and determined. Why do you want to learn to read, Haman? She asked. He lifted a serious brown face to hers and told her his simple little story. I want to go home, he said, but if I go home and can't read, who will go on teaching me the way to heaven? Then you believe it really is the way to heaven? Yes, I had a dream, and I saw the Lord Jesus with his arms stretched out. I think he was on a cross, and behind the cross was a door, wide open, and he told me it was the way to God. He told me that I was to come to you because it was all written down in your book. Very well, said the nurse quietly. You can come every day just about this time. We'll start at once. She fetched a book of Arabic letters and found him to be a very quick pupil, and by the end of a half hour he had learned quite a number of letters and was really pleased with himself. A, D, D, R, E, Z, he chanted proudly. Now I can read. He skipped off with his head held high, and his nurse went off back with a happy heart to clear the breakfast things. And tomorrow we'll read chapter 19, Aunt Rosemary Explains. I love you, I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.